Hey guys, Josh from SoccerReviewsForYou.com, bringing you a video today to share my personal collection of Nike T90s. Now, I did a collection video a little while ago showcasing all of my Nike Mercurials. If you guys missed that video, I'll leave a little pop-up on screen. But today we're going to be doing kind of the same thing. I'm going to be showing you every single T90 that I personally have. But because I happen to have pretty much every single model, not necessarily every variation, we're going to do a little bit of a breakdown as far as the entire history of the now discontinued Nike T90 line as well. So hopefully you'll learn some things if you aren't too familiar with every single model in the lineup up until the very last one, the Laser 4, because that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. You guys are going to get a look at my entire collection. So if any of that interests you, stick around and watch the entire video. And with that being said, let's get right into it. Alright, so here is a look at my entire Nike T90 collection. It's a total of 17 pairs. You see 16 pairs right here on the ground, and the 17th pair I'm actually wearing. We'll get to those in just a second. So starting with the very first ever Nike T90, a shoe that Nike more or less introduced to compete with the very popular at the time Adidas Predator line, also a shoe that is now discontinued. They introduced this guy right here, the Nike Air Zoom Total 91. Or the Total 90. I guess it didn't have a number associated to it at the time. You can see you have the 5 dots there on the tongue. That's because this was part of the Alpha project, which was kind of like a very futuristic, super elite line of footwear that Nike put out in the 1998-1999 era. This also went alongside the Nike Air Zoom Mercurial, the first ever Mercurial shoe that a lot of people, again, aren't too familiar with. I do have a video on those. I'll leave a little pop-up on screen if you haven't seen them. But I'm going to be honest with you guys, this is a shoe that was a little bit before my time. I personally don't have any memories of these as a kid. This pair is from 1999, so at the time I would have been 6 years old. So there's a good reason why I wasn't really paying attention to these at the time. It just wasn't on my radar as a kid. But nonetheless, they're very cool shoes. And you can imagine in 1999, this was a pretty futuristic concept. It's a full synthetic upper. There is no leather, even though it does have that kind of leather-like look to it. And then this did introduce the Interact sole plate, which is a sole plate that a lot of pros actually use, or a stud pattern, I should say, that a lot of professional players continue to use even after it was discontinued past the Air Zoom T92. But very, very cool, very, very unique, and for the time, pretty futuristic. Moving on, we have what I think is the first high-end shoe that I really took notice of. It's the first shoe that in a store I saw them and I knew that was different than all the other soccer shoes that I've personally ever seen, and it's something that I really wanted. Never got a pair as a kid. I would have been probably 8 or 9 years old by the time I took note of these, but still, very, very cool looking shoe. This is an Air Zoom Total 92. So this is the successor to the Air Zoom Total 91. It's a very old pair. These are brand new, but you can see the heel liner is actually just peeling away. It's a very thin material. That's going to come with age, of course. And this is a shoe that was available in a leather and synthetic upper variation. Not sure if this shoe was the Air Zoom 291. I believe it was only synthetic. But nonetheless, this is the synthetic variation of the AZ T92. Very cool colorway in this kind of silver on silver. Same sole plate. These did include kind of a Zoom Air implementation in the forefoot and heel area. That's something that we didn't see in the T90 line past the Laser 1, which we'll get to in just a second. But nonetheless, very cool shoe. Obviously, key characteristics here are the off-centered lacing system and the fold-over flap tongue there. And then, of course, again, you did get the Interact stud pattern. And again, at the time, very, very cool looking shoe. In my opinion, one of the best looking T90s out of all of them. So, really big fan of those. Next to that shoe, I have actually the first takedown model. And this is a shoe that I ended up purchasing on accident, thinking that it was the top-end model. You can see the difference here on the tongue. This is an Air Zoom Total 90, whereas on this shoe, it's an Air Zoom 90. So that is the distinction between the top-end model and the lower-end model. Aside from that, they look very, very similar. It's pretty much the exact same upper. The difference is the lack of Zoom Air, I believe, in the sole plate. Again, very minor differences between these two shoes, but again, despite looking very similar, this is in fact a takedown model, but the quality still appears to be pretty good. Next to those, we have the Air Zoom T93. Now this was a pretty cool shoe. Again, I never really wore a pair of them, But interesting, because of this lacing system, you can see it doesn't have the tongue anymore, and that's something that I guess they started a trend with this particular shoe, because after the T90, the Air Zoom T92, they got rid of the tongue entirely, which I guess is something we don't really see from modern shoes at all anymore. So they eliminated a little bit of extra bulk, and obviously this shoe has a very distinctive look just in terms of the design in general. They all had these kind of split colorways for the most part. Then you had the big 90 there on the heel counter. If you look at the other shoe right here, it actually came with a sticker. I haven't taken this one out of the bag or anything like that. This one just has a 90 sticker, but basically it's like a plastic sticker, and I believe you could buy these in pretty much any number at all, and it fits inside the slot in the heel counter perfectly. So if you didn't want it to say 90, you could actually get your own personal number and have it on your shoe, kind of as a personalization feature. And then of course they did change up the sole plate and stud pattern, still incorporated Zoom Air in the heel on this particular shoe. And again, very, very solid shoe. This one I believe was only available in a synthetic upper variation, as far as I can remember. I could be wrong on that. But again, pretty decent shoe overall. And then of course, we're gonna go around here really, really quickly. We move on to this guy right here, where they didn't continue with the Air Zoom T90 I guess that's technically what you could call this shoe, but instead they called this the Air Zoom T90 Supremacy. So this is the Air Zoom T90 unofficially, and you can see it does retain a lot of the same design elements as what we saw from the previous model. The exact same sole plate, or the exact same stud pattern, sorry, or something very similar. They incorporated some blades there at the heel. Still incorporated the Zoom Air. You still have the big heel counter. But the upper is a little bit different this time around. I would say that this is a lot nicer quality. This being the synthetic variation, there was a kangaroo leather model as well. But out of all of them, I would say that I think this was one of the better colorways, at least in my personal opinion. So really happy to have these. I did have a pair of these as a kid, although it wasn't the top end model. It was the first one below. That was actually quite similar to these. The main difference was the sole plate itself. The upper was almost identical. But really, really nice looking shoe, and they did have this little cutout again in the heel, which I think I have the stickers. Yeah, here are the stickers right here. Again, you could buy the stickers. These are just the 90 ones that came with the shoes. It'll focus eventually, but you could put the sticker in there. You could buy the sticker with your number, have that in the heel, and kind of personalize the shoes to a certain extent. But that is the Air Zoom Supremacy, again available in a kangaroo leather upper variation as well, which I'm still working on getting a pair of. I'd really like to have a pair of those in my collection, but nonetheless, this particular colorway of the Supremacy, I'm personally very happy to have. So moving back over to the left side of the pile, we have this guy right here, the first of the Laser series. So this is the Nike Air Zoom, not the Air Zoom, this is the Nike T90 Laser 1. So this did incorporate Zoom Air technology in the heel. Basically it was just a Zoom bag. Pretty much the exact same sole plate and stud pattern as what we saw on the Supremacy, but obviously they incorporated a rubberized element. So this was the first time we did get a rubber element on the Nike T90 line. And this was a shoe that as a kid, I was super, super excited about. Marketing online was kind of becoming a thing for these companies. I knew it was coming out, I want to say about a month in advance of the official release. I pre-ordered a pair. I actually got this shoe in this exact colorway. On the first day it came out, the first day it was available at my local soccer store, and I was really, really stoked on these. And I still think it's a very cool looking shoe. One of the better looking shoes Nike has ever put out in my opinion. The rubberized striking element, not the most effective thing in all honesty. What I really like about this shoe is that it is so clean where you strike the ball. The rubber itself is not particularly grippy, and the actual impact that it does have on performance is, in all honesty, very, very minimal, but the feel of wearing this shoe was very cool. I have very fond memories of it. It's a very comfortable shoe. This is the synthetic upper variation, which hopefully if I can get the camera to focus, you can see it has this really interesting kind of like grid style texturing to it. There was a kangaroo leather upper variation of this shoe as well, which I never actually got to wear, but nonetheless, very, very cool shoe. One of my personal favorites in the T90 line in terms of ones that I've actually worn. And I think it's pretty safe to say that a lot of people do have this in their hearts as kind of the best T90 model in the modern Laser era. But the Lasers in general were all pretty unique. So moving on from the Laser 1, we got the Laser 2, which introduced quite a few different variations. That was the launch colorway of the Laser 1 in yellow. This is the launch colorway of the Laser 2 in this kind of army green and volt yellow with black studs, and the actual rubberized element itself is all black. And this is another shoe, because I like the T90 Laser one so much, I was very, very excited about the Laser 2. And this is a shoe that, for the first time, kind of as a teenager, I guess I would say, I was always somebody who, whenever I got a new pair of shoes, I always wanted something different. I never wanted to buy the same shoe twice. But with the Laser 2, I had an original pair. Actually, I had the leather version first. Not this exact colorway, but I did have the leather variation. And I ended up having 2 other models of the synthetic variation, just because it was a shoe that, like I said, I liked them so much. I ended up buying it twice. I believe it was within 2 seasons or something like that. So it was a shoe that I bought 3 times in a row, something that I really had never done before, and it's just because I really, really like the shoe and didn't want to wear anything else. So with this shoe, they introduced the synthetic variation that I have right here, which had this big rubberized element running through the middle of the shoe, and then obviously it expands on the left and right side of the forefoot, where the laces run down either side of the striking element. So it's really, really unusual. Not the best fitting shoe in terms of just locking the midfoot in place. In all honesty, it's a little bit unusual, but it does fit fairly well, all things considered. It's a pretty comfortable shoe. It introduced this very, very aggressive bladed stud pattern that I still think is very, very good. I wish Nike would offer something like this still in their current lineup. Unfortunately, they don't anymore. You got the big plastic heel counter, as you guys can see, and the actual synthetic itself, because the majority of the actual upper is the striking element, it doesn't have that big of an impact on the overall touch, but it is, I guess, a little bit thinner in comparison to the leather variation, which, as you guys can see, I have them right here. Instead of having the rubberized striking element extend to the lateral side of the forefoot, it's pretty much just straight up leather. I'm not sure why the camera's having a hard time here. I'm trying to get it to focus. Let's see if we can help it out. Oh, we're gonna get it. We're gonna get it. I don't know why it's having such a hard time. There it goes. But you can see this part is leather as opposed to extending as a rubberized element, and then of course you do get the rubberized element here on the medial side, and then all the white part that you see is actually kangaroo leather. Is it the best quality? In all honesty, not really, but it did give you a slightly kind of softer, slightly more cushioned feel that I personally preferred over the standard synthetic variation. But at the same time, the difference between the two, in all honesty, is not all that significant. And then later on, they introduced an alternate synthetic variation that had these kind of micro perforations through it. So this is a synthetic material that I think is personally a little bit softer. It's also a little bit thicker, and I just think feels a little nicer in general than what we got from that green pair right there, the initial colorways. This was available in silver, which I have right here. Very, very cool looking colorway. I had a pair of these in the yellow and black. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember those. But again, just a slightly different kind of synthetic variation that they introduced later in the, I guess, run of the T90 Laser 2. And then I also have another colorway right here that I ended up just getting for a really good price, so I grabbed them just for the collection in this very, very unique silver, black, and orange color that, again, the shoe itself just looks very, very spacey. You could bring this out 10 years later and it's still going to look like a modern shoe. It's very unlike anything else that we have currently available. Now, moving on from the T90 Laser 2s, we have the T90 Laser 3s. And actually, before we get to that, I want to go to the shoes that I'm personally wearing before I forget. So these are actually some training shoes, and I'll give you guys a quick look at these. Very, very interesting. This is the Nike Air Max Total 365. So this is kind of a trainer / indoor variation of the Nike Air Zoom T92. So kind of unusual, really weird colorway in this kind of champagne gold and maroon burgundy. But pretty cool. I have these kind of just, I ran across them at a weird soccer store. I forget where I was, but I found them. I got them for a really good deal. Haven't actually worn them that much. Here and there when I remember that I have them, I bring them out and just wear them just for fun. But pretty cool shoe. It's the upper of the standard kind of high-end shoe, and then this kind of older Nike T90. You got a heel air unit right there at the back. Not exactly ideal for indoor soccer, but something that I think is pretty cool and is part of my T90 collection. Nonetheless, we're moving back on to the T90 Laser 3s, which I think is the most aggressive out of all the T90 variations. I think if you're going to go all out with a rubberized striking element, this is kind of a great example of how a rubberized striking element can really change the feel of a shoe. Yes, it's very cool in terms of what they did on the Laser 1 and Laser 2, but with this shoe, it really had a noticeable impact in terms of how it felt when striking the ball. So with this particular shoe, I don't have the launch colorway in a synthetic variation, unfortunately, or the launch variation of the shoe, the standard version. I do have the standard version of the shoe in kangaroo leather right here. So basically all the white part you see is kangaroo leather, whereas on a standard variation, that white part would normally be a synthetic material. That, in all honesty, the difference wasn't that big. The leather version was a little bit nicer, but the synthetic was more along the lines of a kind of synthetic leather. You actually see it right here on this Elite variation that I have. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the leather and synthetic version was like. But the star here was definitely the rubberized striking element, which was pretty significant. So all the red rubber that you see, again, the camera's having a hard time. Give me a second. Eventually it should focus. There it goes. So the red rubber is actually really, really grippy. And that is covering pretty much the entire striking area of the shoe, including the medial side of the forefoot. So pretty much every time you made contact with the ball, as long as it wasn't the outside of your foot, you were getting this enhanced grip from the rubberized element on the ball, which did take some getting used to. Not everybody liked it. I personally was a really big fan of it. The only other shoe that I've personally worn that compares to this shoe in terms of grip on the ball is the Adidas Predator Instinct, which a shoe I was also a really, really big fan of. So no major surprise there. You also got these little rubberized fins kind of hanging off the edge. You can see them when I turn the shoe like this, and they're very, very flexible. They grip the ball really, really nicely. Hopefully you guys can hear that, but these would actually rip off over time. If you got stepped on or something like that, it would just rip off these little grips, which wasn't a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but it's a really, really cool element in terms of just allowing you to develop a lot of grip on the ball with, I guess, less technique required, if that makes any sense. And then you had these kind of black pads right here, these little pods that were there with the intention of giving you a nice kind of flat, really clean striking surface to give you that nice pingy sensation. And you really got that from this striking element. It was a shoe that was very kind of purpose-built in terms of really the main focus being striking the ball. And for that, I think it was probably the best design out of all the Nike T90 models, just in terms of how different it felt in comparison to anything else that also was designed around striking the ball. Really, really big fan of these. You got the big heel counter. They maintain the same sole plate as what you got on the Laser 2. And again, I just think it's a really, really good shoe. Come the 2010 World Cup, they introduced this guy right here, which is the Elite variation of the Laser 3. This has a Teijin synthetic upper, which is really, really unusual. So this took the upper from, at the time, I guess the Mercurial Vapor, would it have been Vapor 6 or Vapor 7? I want to say it would have been Vapor 6 at the time. Come on, camera. Giving me a hard time here. I'm not sure why. There it goes. But you can see it does have a Teijin synthetic upper. This pair is slightly worn, but it's fairly thin, fairly soft, a little bit lighter than what you would find from the standard variation. Obviously, it does have the standard striking element. It does have the coloring of the 2010 World Cup shoes. And then it does have technically the same stud pattern as well, but it also features a carbon fiber sole plate, which at the time was exclusive to the Superfly 2. So that was something that I thought was really, really cool at the time. I didn't have a pair of these personally as a kid, but I did end up getting the standard variation of the Laser Elites, which I have right here. So this was after the World Cup. They reintroduced the Laser Elite in the form of just giving you the standard Laser 3 upper with that carbon fiber bottom. And in all honesty, looking back at the time, I thought the Laser Elite variation was definitely a lot better than the standard version just because it was a little bit lighter. But I actually prefer the feel of the standard variation over the Elite version just because the sole plate's a little bit more flexible, and because of the different sole plate, the fit of the shoe was impacted a little bit as well, and I just feel the standard version fits a little bit better despite not looking as cool minus the carbon fiber sole plate. But that's what you get here with the T90 Laser 3 Elite. So you had a World Cup Elite, a regular Elite, and then a synthetic and leather variation of the standard model. And then finally, we have the last, unfortunately, the last T90 Laser model, or the last T90 model in general, the Laser 4. And I have 3 pairs of these left. Wish I would have kept more, but Unfortunately, I didn't. So the first pair that I have right here is actually a Kangalite variation. This was also available in leather and Kangalite models, depending on the colorway. This is from the 2012, no, not 2012. Yeah, 2012 Euro Cup. I'm not wrong there, which is a really cool colorway. The Clash Pack, I'm sure a lot of you guys remember these. White at the front. The T90 was green at the heel. The Tiempo was black at the heel. The Vapor was pink at the heel. And then, what was the other line? The CTR360 was blue at the heel. So this is a really cool shoe. This is a Soft Ground Pro variation, as you guys can see. And they kept kind of the same design idea as what you got from the T90 Laser 3, but they took the actual striking element and they kind of minimized it a little bit. They made it a much firmer rubber. They maintained the fins right here on the forefoot area, which I really, really like. They were more durable, definitely, but didn't provide quite the same grip on the ball as what you got from the Laser 3, which I thought was a little bit unfortunate. And again, it's just a less significant striking element in general. This is the first time in the T90 line, I would say, that they didn't really make any major changes that were for the better, or to at least create a different experience. This was kind of a variation of the Laser 3 that I think perhaps they thought would appeal to more people just because it was less over the top. But I personally preferred the Laser 3. I still think the Laser 4 is a very good shoe. Perhaps a little bit more streamlined overall in comparison to the Laser 3. But that's kind of what they did as an evolution. And then of course later on in the Laser line, they introduced ACC, which at the time was kind of a big deal from Nike. Now we see it on all of their top end models. This is a standard synthetic upper variation, so a little bit thinner than the Kangalite. Very bright colorway here in the Volt Yellow and black combination. And then I have another pair, also ACC, this one with Kangalite in this kind of gunmetal gray and orange. You can see it's kind of the same stud pattern as what you got from the Laser 2, as well as the Laser 3, just without the kind of angles in the studs. More standard layout in general. Again, a little bit more of a sleek design, but I just personally prefer the more aggressive, slightly bulkier look and feel of the Laser 3, sorry, but that's just my personal opinion. So that is pretty much it for my T90 Laser collection. Hopefully you enjoyed, you learned a little bit. I know I rambled, but I tend to ramble. So with that said, I'll leave it to my final thoughts. Alright guys, that is it for my Nike Total 90 collection video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to support the video with a like. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments as well, and I definitely will get an answer to you. And of course, I do have a pretty big collection, so if you guys would like to see more videos of this style where I show you guys all the shoes I have of a particular model throughout the years, let me know which model specifically you'd like to see down below in the comment section, and I definitely will get to working on more collection videos again, given that you guys want to see more. Subscribe if you haven't already for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all of my social media information linked in the description as well. And other than that guys, hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, thanks for watching.